I would like to start with sketching the setting of my university in a very peculiar city that is the seat of government, but not the capital. A city that has many global organizations, and those all provide learning opportunities for our students. A very diverse student population, many of them first generation in higher education. But our education is delivered for 90% in Dutch. So we have international programs, but internationalization is also very much part of the education we deliver in Dutch. So it is not about changing languages. It is about the different perspectives, as Professor Jones has also explained. Well, when we look at internationalization at home, internationalization of the curriculum across Europe, we see big differences. So there is, first of all, a difference between the Anglophone countries, the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the setting has been described as focused on student recruitment. On the continent, although I find that living on the continent a strange term, but you also see differences. So internationalization at home started off 20 years ago in the Nordic countries. So you see that it's very prominent in Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, and in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. So we've seen that internationalization at home is mostly favored in countries with smaller populations and smaller languages. And this is now changing. We see that Germany is becoming involved in internationalization at home, and Austria, but in Southern Europe and in Eastern Europe, internationalization at home is not very high on the agenda yet, but it is changing. So Professor Jones showed this definition that we composed together, and I would like to pick up on two of the elements in that definition. The first is the purposeful, and the second is the notion of all students. And of course, there is also, and this was also mentioned, the integration element of international and intercultural. So it's not separate, it is integrated into the curriculum. So if we look at the purposeful, then this is something that we do not want. And we do not want to get on those stairs not knowing where we will end up. And there should have been a door at the top there. So we will want to start with defining outcomes. Why do we do this? And then design the learning activities. But we come from a tradition where we were activities based, and now we become outcomes oriented. And this is also, in Dutch architectural terms, it could look like this. If you add learning outcomes for international and intercultural learning on top of your regular learning outcomes in a program of studies and do not integrate. And so then you get two different buildings and this integration is not achieved. So what we are rather aiming for is what you see on the right. And we see our students graduating at the level of that platform. That is our orientation. Those are our outcomes. And then we construct the ladder for them to get there. And so to integrate international and intercultural in all the steps of that ladder. So this requires that we think very carefully about our curriculum and do not insert one or two international modules, but we have an internationalized curriculum throughout. And some of the discussions that we're having are about big terms and big concepts like global citizenship. We talk about wicked problems, and those are the problems that require interdisciplinary approaches to solve. We talk about the sustainable development goals, as Professor Jones has already shown. We're talking about decolonization of the curriculum, and we talk about 21st century skills employability skills, etc. And those are all boxes that need to be unpacked within a specific context. That is the context of a discipline. So this is very different in engineering as compared to primary education or business, but also in the context of the setting of the university. So just sticking on these labels is not enough. You have to unpack them and see what makes them relevant in a particular program of studies. And that is not an easy task. And moreover, it's not a task that anyone can do. This is typically a task for the academics in a department, because they are the only ones who can tell us what is relevant in their particular context. So that requires a lot of academic work. And internationalization at home involves many stakeholders. These are the stakeholders in implementing internationalization at home. It's not about teaching internationalization at home, because then the students would be at the center, but this is the stakeholders that are designing internationalization at home. And that is no longer the international office where internationalization was housed when we were only talking about mobility. And we're talking here about curriculum development. And it is important, therefore, that the academics are connected to educational developers, quality assurance officers, who can help them to design such an interculturalized and internationalized curriculum. So it is also requires us to rethink how we have organized internationalization in our universities. So in the classical situation, the mobile minority, the cultural elite, as they have been called by a Norwegian researcher, is still the norm. I saw in University World News a mention that in Sweden, the national policy for internationalization has failed because they are not sending the anticipated 25% of students abroad. So it will always be a small minority, a minority that has the mindset and, of course, the financial means to go abroad. But we will not reach the majority of students to get on that plane. The majority will remain on their bikes down below. And therefore, it is strange that we still, also in the Dutch national policies for internationalization, put mobility first. And the alternative is an internationalized curriculum, but that is a sort of second grade. So we should flip that around. We should say we want to reach 100% of our students through the curriculum. And additionally, students may go abroad, but we acknowledge that that will not be all. And another thing that we should do is build on internationalization that students have experienced in primary and secondary education, because they have already experienced quite some internationalization. So we are still struggling with some concepts. I'm not sure if you recognize this picture, but this is by the Dutch artist Maurits Escher. His museum is close to my university. And these are the stairs where you can't tell whether people are going up and down or down. So this is the misconceptions. I just mentioned already that it's a misconception to think that internationalization at home is a second option for non-mobile students. It is a misconception to think that if you offer electives for a small percentage of your students, you are internationalizing at home, because we are talking about all students. It's also a misconception to think that you have internationalized the curriculum if you teach it in English, because it is about the perspectives, the different perspectives, the normal and the not normal that Professor Jones talked about, and that doesn't depend on language. It is about receiving international students, but it is also about how effective you are in making sure that your home students learn from those international students. And just having the international students is not enough. And finally, internationalization at home is also a preparation for mobility, but that is only part of it. So it is not equivalent to it. So these are some of the misconceptions that we are going up and down the stairs with. What we have found is that the key obstacles are precisely this confusion that muddles the discussion. We see that many universities include internationalization at home in their policies, but have no strategies to make it happen. And so writing it down in a policy document doesn't mean it is happening in the departments. We see a lack of connection between stakeholders, particularly the education specialists and the internationalization specialists who should work together on curriculum development. And we see that there is a lack of professional development in this field for academics, for example, in virtual exchange. I would like to touch upon another topic, and that is precisely this virtual exchange. Already there we see confusion in terminology. We have chosen to embrace collaborative online international learning, particularly because of the collaborative element. Compared to other forms of virtual exchange, COIL is the most intensive and also can bring most benefits to our students if we properly design it. And that means, I usually say, COIL is 90% design and 10% technology. For us, other forms of online collaboration have disappeared in the background. So MOOCs, for example, are not so much part of the discussion anymore. The discussion is really towards, for example, solving wicked problems and therefore requiring intensive collaboration between students through COIL. COIL and internationalization at home are not identical. So COIL does not often reach all students. It's difficult to organize for a large group of students. So it does not really match one-to-one, but you can consider COIL an important component of an internationalized curriculum. The implementation can be top-down or bottom-up. Professor Wim Penny from Coventry University and John Rubin, maybe the father of COIL, and I wrote a chapter in this book in which we compared two models, so the top-down model and the bottom-up model. In both cases, we have to look at issues of alignment. And so you do not want to develop a COIL practice as a standalone. It needs to be one of the steps of that ladder. And there needs to be a connection with all the other elements of an internationalized curriculum. We also need to think about why we use COIL, whether it is the best instrument. Some people initiate COIL for interdisciplinary work, but you can also do interdisciplinary work in your own university. And so do you really choose a COIL practice in order to be the best instrument for that particular outcome that you have in mind? And what we see in Europe is that COIL actually stimulates mobility. People say, well, you know, we are working online together, but we are not all that far removed from each other. So let's meet each other physically for a closing conference with students. One of the blogs that is referred to at the end of my presentation is an example of such a practice. I would like to share just a few slides from a project in the field of coil that we run with 5 European and 5 South African universities. And the happy picture that you see here was actually the only meeting we physically had before COVID struck. So we all met in South Africa. And all the further meetings, and there was quite a strong emphasis on professional development and training, but we have had to move all that online. So I would like to share a few of the things we learned from working in this project, and you also see the URL here. So have a look at that website, and we try to regularly write blogs there about the project. So one of the challenges is that it is a capacity building project, which assumes that one group of universities has knowledge that the other needs. But we tried from the beginning to make that inequality as small as possible. But it is there between the European and the South African partners, but also among the European and the South African partners. The University of Siena in Italy was founded in 1275. My university was founded in 1995. So there are differences also among the partners in Europe and South Africa. It is interesting to meet negative connotations of internationalization. So we in the West tend to think it is always positive, but in the South African context, it is not. We try to avoid applying standards, but instead we used appreciative inquiry, which is a form of action research that focuses on what is possible in a particular context. And so rather than saying you have to meet our European standards, we went into discussions focusing on what is possible and what is desirable in the particular context. We are realizing 55 plus COIL practices. And for us in The Hague, the main driver is to make our curricula finally global, because we do say we are globally oriented, but that means still Western, the Western world in practice, although we have many links with Asia as well, but North-South collaborations are not that frequently found. So for us, this is an opportunity to make our curricula truly global. And what we've also tried to do is to write our publications in a collaborative way. And we have, for example, presented a paper on how distance brought us closer together in this project. So we are learning how to handle colonial versus decolonial perspectives and how they relate to internationalization. And in South Africa, the discussion is also how they relate to decolonization, Africanization, and transformation of universities. The context is extremely important: the university, the location, the discipline. The C in COIL, the collaborative, is a special point of focus, because doing things together doesn't make it collaborative. The collaborative really is the key here, and students have to need each other. So you need to design in such a way that students work together intensively in order to finish this COIL practice. I mentioned something about MOOCs. We now know that 72% of the students participating in MOOCs does not complete them. And so that's not what we want. 90% educational design, 10% technology. So these are some of our learnings. And I would like to end with a view ahead, what post-COVID internationalization in Europe may look like. Bringing internationalization into all teaching and learning, benefiting from the international intercultural opportunities in the local environment wherever possible, You can think about short-term mobility within Europe and virtual exchange or COIL with partners further away. And remember, we were trying to reduce CO2 imprint before this crisis hit us. So it would not be logical to all get on the plane to Australia again for, let's say, 3 months mobility. And then finally, there will be the classical mobility understood as 6 months abroad at a partner university always. That should not disappear. But it will take a different position among all these other components of internationalization in Europe. And by the way, although the United Kingdom has left the European Union, we still consider the United Kingdom very much part of Europe. Thank you for your attention, and I hope I've given you some perspectives from some parts of Europe. Thank you.